Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I will show you how to make your own Filofax organizer. Let's take a look at the tools that we need. Firstly, a sewing machine, then a walking foot, thick sewing machine needle, non-fabric scissors, drawing tools, a permanent marker, screwdriver, hole punch pliers, awl, small blade, drill, 2 to 4 mm drill bits, paper tape or clips, a drill, and a vacuum cleaner. In this picture you can see some of the tools that I used. Note that the fabric scissors are shown, but I ended up not needing them. Now let's look at the materials I used, as well as PPE. Firstly, the tarpaulin, which I used to create the organizer. We need a ring mechanism, thread. I used denim thread because it's thicker and a bit stronger. We need popper studs. I used the ones from Prim, the sports and camping variety. These are very sturdy and I expect them to last a long time. I also need reinforcement to give some shape to the organizer, and plain paper. I used safety goggles and ear protection when I was using the drill. In this picture you can see some of the materials I used, as well as some of the tools. Top left you can see the paper model I made before starting to work on the actual organizer. The pink and green plastic are what I used as reinforcement. These are covers from spiral-bound notebooks. I no longer need it. Bottom right are the instructions that came with the ring mechanism. The ring mechanism is shown on the left, above the scissors. Top right you can see some sample tarp, on which I trialed sewing with my own machine, as well as the industrial machine available at the sewing class I took last year. This is a close-up of the ring mechanism. It's a personal size with 30 mm internal diameter rings. It comes with Chicago screws. These have a male and female part, and the male part screws into the stem of the female part. 2 male parts were provided for each screw to allow for use in organizers of different thickness. And note that I didn't use the backing strip because I had already used reinforcement on my spine, as you will see in the rest of the video. The first thing I did is create a paper scale model, just by eye, to see what kind of width to length ratio I found aesthetically pleasing. I included a flap on the right and a strap closure. This flap will fold over the right side of the organizer content. I wanted this to protect the contents from all the junk in my handbag. I then made a full-size paper model to the exact measurements I had in mind. This was really helpful because it showed me I actually wanted the organizer to be half a centimeter taller so that it would fit the ring mechanism better. I then created a quick doodle showing all the pieces I would have to cut out of the tarp and the plastic reinforcement. And note that I added half a centimeter extra to the length. I used tarpaulin to create my organizer. This material is also called tarp. It's made of a mesh that's covered by PVC on both sides. It's commonly used on the sides of lorries and to cover things that are stored outside. You might see it at building sites or in warehouses. There are 2 sides to it, one matte side shown at the top and one bubbly or shiny side shown at the bottom here. You can pick either side depending on what you think looks best. I chose the bubbly side for the outside and the inside of my organizer. In this image you can see the 3 pieces of plastic reinforcement. Note that I rounded the corners of these pieces. I placed these pieces on one of the pieces of tarp so you can see where they will end up going, sandwiched between the 2 layers of tarp. I used permanent marker on the wrong side of the tarp to draw where I wanted to cut. This way, if you can still see a bit of the marker, it's not an issue as it's hidden inside of the layers of tarp. I used craft scissors, not fabric scissors, to cut the tarp and the plastic. Here you can see all the pieces I cut out. There are 3 plastic reinforcement pieces shown top left. There are 2 pieces of tarp that form the outer shell and inner shell of the organizer. Then there are two small strips that will be stitched together to become the press stud strap for closure. Then there is a longer strip of tarp I'll use to sort of reinforce the spine, because this is where the ring mechanism will be attached to. And then there are 3 pieces I plan to use to create internal pockets, but because I'm not super satisfied with the stitching yet, I decided to not make my life harder and omit these pockets for now. The first thing I sewed is the left inner pocket, which I ended up not using. I then attached the reinforcement strip to the inside of the outer shell. In this image we are looking at the outer shell from the outside of the organizer. The organizer is shown upside down because this is how I was placing it in my sewing machine. I'm right-handed, perhaps that plays into it. I stitched the outer shell and inner shell together along 3 of the sides of what is to become the front panel, or the left flap. The side at the spine was left open so I could slide the plastic reinforcement into the front panel. Now it gets a little tricky. We are still looking at the outer shell, the outside of the organizer, upside down again like in the previous photo. I had to fix the front panel plastic reinforcement into place, but I had already stitched along the spine when I attached the reinforcement strip to the outer shell. I did not want to stitch over the same bit twice, so I decided to fix the front panel reinforcement into place with 3 short bits of stitching alongside the existing stitching line, as shown by the red arrows. I then inserted the plastic reinforcement for the spine and also used 3 short bits of stitching to fix it into place. Now we have attached the outer and inner shell alongside the front panel and spine, but the 2 pieces are still separate where the back panel and modesty panel will be. I had previously partially attached the 2 pieces of tarp that form the strap. I then attached the strap to the outer shell of the back panel. I was not paying enough attention and didn't refer to my paper model, so I ended up placing the strap a little too close to the modesty panel. It still works fine, but the stitching ended up looking a little cluttered, as you'll see in the next photo. I then stitched along the blue lines, and then inserted the plastic reinforcement for the back panel and stitched along the yellow line to fix it into place. Finally, I stitched along the purple line to close up the side of the modesty panel. Note that this panel does not have plastic reinforcement, because I want it to be very flexible so I can fold over the long edge of the organizer opening. After all the stitching was done, this is what it looks like. We are now looking at the inner shell, the inside of the organizer, with the front panel on the left and the modesty panel on the right. So this time the organizer is shown with the top at the top and the bottom at the bottom. At the spine you can see the 3 short bits of stitching next to the plastic reinforcement for the spine. In a future organizer, this will be 1 row of stitches over the full length on each side of the spine. Here we are looking at the outer shell, the outside of the organizer. Circled in red is the area of clumsy stitching, because I didn't follow my own design. We now need to make some holes in the spine so the ring mechanism can be attached. I initially thought I could do all of the holes in advance by making the holes into every individual piece before assembling all the pieces. However, I was worried that the holes would not perfectly align, so I decided to create the holes last when all of the pieces of the organizer had already been attached to each other. When you are using the drill, ensure that you wear eye and ear protection. I used either a 3 or a 4 mm drill bit. I used a small piece of MDF to drill into to protect my floor, but this created a fair bit of MDF dust. Drilling through the entire spine created plastic shavings too, the green bits that you can see in the picture. This is plastic from the plastic reinforcement of the spine. And this is where the vacuum cleaner comes in handy. I tried to remove as much dust from around the hole as possible, but I think some of it still ended up in between the layers of the organizer. I'm not super happy about this, and the next time I will try making all the holes before stitching the pieces together and see whether there are issues with hole alignment or not. I used an awl to make the holes a little larger. In the picture we are looking at the inside of the organizer. I used a blade to try to cut away some of the scrap bits of tarp that were still attached around the hole. I then used my hole punch pliers, using the 2mm punch, to create a hole in the strap. This is where the top part of the popper stud goes. I needed an awl to make the hole a tiny bit larger before I could insert the top part of the popper. You'd like to create a tight fit. It's better to spend a little bit more time to make it work in a tighter fit than have a loose fit. At least that's my experience. I used the drill to create holes through the whole front panel so I could attach the bottom parts of the popper studs there. I think I used the 2mm drill bit for this, but may have also ended up using the 3mm one to make the hole large enough. It's best that you try to do this on a sort of trial piece before you start drilling into your organizer. I then attach the popper studs. If the little tool that comes with it doesn't allow you to go into your material as far as needed, just break the clip part apart into two halves. You will have to be a little more careful when using the tool then, but it's the only way to get in further than the tool allows. And this is the final result as seen from the outside. You can see the two poppers are at a slightly different height. This is because I didn't measure and just used the strap with a small hole before I inserted the popper, and I use this as a guide. Next time I'll actually just measure instead, as this is more accurate. This is what the organizer looks like when closed. And here you can see the organizer open with my personal organizer and diary inserts. You can see handmade dividers with tabs on the side. I made these a while ago. I may make a video on how to do this, but there already are quite a lot of videos of people showing you how to do this. When I close the organizer, the contents will move to the right a bit, closer to the edge. This is why I made the organizer as wide as I did. Whilst working on this organizer, I encountered several problems, and I think I have some solutions for these for next time. I found it quite challenging to stitch the tarp. Because of this, I decided to make things easier for myself and skip the internal pockets, so I would not have to sew through 3 or 4 layers of tarp. However, close to finishing this project, I realized I could have just offset the internal pockets a little inwards, as is shown on this illustration. That way, I would only have had to sew through 2 layers to attach the pocket itself and the inner shell of the organizer. When I would then attach the outer shell and inner shell to each other, I would also only have to stitch through 2 layers. And I think a leather needle may also help too, so I will try this next time. Another issue I found is buckling of the tarp on the inner shell. This makes sense because the organizer is created flat, with the outer shell and inner shell made of the same sized piece of tarp. When I then close the organizer, the inner shell is actually a little too large, but because it's fixed into place, it starts to buckle, as the excess material has to go somewhere. Look at the arrows in the picture on the left. You can see some bubbling/buckling. A solution, or partial solution, I think, is to create a sort of hinge by stitching 2 parallel rows without any plastic reinforcement. See the image on the right. I also found that the ring mechanism has this sort of tube bit around the hole, and it's a little longer than I need. I think this is to allow for fitting through thicker organizers. It's not an issue that this is too long for my organizer. You only notice when you look for it. I think I could resolve this, or at least in part, by making the spine of my organizer a little thicker, perhaps with 1 or even 2 layers of craft foam in between the layers of tarp. Finally, as I was using the organizer, I found it a bit too floppy, not as rigid enough as I like, when you are writing with your one hand and using your other hand to hold open the organizer, when you're not sat at a table or when you can't use your lap because you stood upright. The organizer tends to want to fall open, but you try to create a flat surface for writing, and I found this hurt my left hand. One possible solution is to use 2 layers of the plastic reinforcement, or find a sturdier or thicker plastic for reinforcement. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful. Check out my website and especially my blog for many more posts on arts and crafts projects.